Finally, the Founding Fathers had to focus on designing the judicial branch. They spent less time on this than the other branches, as shown by the shorter length and less specific language in Article 3 of the Constitution, where the judicial branch is found. A few things they did mention, though, were that the Supreme Court was given final jurisdiction between national and state differences. Any disputes between the two levels of government would be decided by the federal court, the Supreme Court. The next part was the Supremacy Clause, which established the Constitution as a supreme law of the land. The Constitution would be the final say on any issue, which again sets up the federal government as the strongest level of government compared to the states. Finally, while not mentioned in the Constitution, the Federalist Papers discussed the idea that the Supreme Court would be the branch that interpreted the Constitution and could strike down any laws that violated it. This power, known as judicial review, was codified in the case Marbury v. Madison in 1803. So now that we've written the Constitution, it's time to ratify or to make it law. The Founding Fathers decided that once 9 states were in agreement with the Constitution, then it would be the official law governing this new nation. This was important because it was a lower bar than the unanimous assent rule of the Articles of Confederation, and it took away some authority from state legislatures who may not want to give away some of their freedom and power. There is still significant work to be done, though, including making the case to the people that this new document was the right way to govern, because if we're going to be governed by the people for the people, well, we need to convince them that this is good for them, that this is the right way to go going forward. We shouldn't just pass it down from on high. The people were not unanimously on board yet, and so we had significant debates between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Anti-Federalists, as the name implies, were against a strong national or federal government. They argued that only local democracy could approach true democracy, and that the federal government would immediately engage in the type of tyranny they had just fought a major war to avoid. They want to avoid this at all costs and keep government as close to these small communities as you possibly can. On the other side, we have the Federalists, who wrote some documents known as the Federalist Papers. These were 85 essays written by Alexander Hamilton, who wrote most of them, John Jay, who wrote 5 of them, and James Madison, who wrote the most famous ones. These essays originally appeared in New York City newspapers and were aimed at convincing the people of the virtue of a federal government. They were so important that Thomas Jefferson once described them as the genuine meaning of the Constitution. We're going to discuss a few of them here, and we're going to read quite a few of them in class as we go forward. They're all available online, and if you really want to understand the Constitution and know what our government is supposed to be doing and what the Founding Fathers actually meant, you should read them all. But we're going to talk about a couple of them in this lecture and then more as we go forward. The first one being Federalist 10. And Federalist 10 focuses on the fundamental problem of self-governance. We are not angels, as Madison observed. So how do we get a government of non-angels not only to govern the governed, but to govern itself as well? Federalist 10 concentrated on the dangers of these factions that are drawn. Madison argues that people are drawn to creating factions or groups like moths are to a flame. Think about every reality show ever, for those of you who watch Survivor, or really any of the shows, where they go and immediately form alliances to help win. The Hunger Games, right, where they immediately, career recruits always go and form alliances and they go against Katniss and all the heroes. The American cinematic classic Mean Girls, where, from what I'm told, there's any number of factions who sit at different lunch tables and constantly wage war on each other. Madison warned that these factions would be made up of a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or minority of the whole, who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion or of interest, adverse to the rights of other citizens or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community. Madison then identifies 2 ways to eliminate factions: authoritarianism, where we tell people that they're just not allowed to join groups, or conformism, where we require everyone to have the same belief. Well, neither is really acceptable to us, so we're not going to be able to remove these root causes of factions. If we can't do that, then we must be able to control the effects rather than snuffing out liberty. There are 2 types of factions at play, with 2 separate concerns: tyranny of the majority and tyranny of the minority. We control these factions in different ways. We control minority factions, small groups of people, through democracy. Because by definition, democracy means that the majority rules. If you have a large enough group, you will get your way through the ballot box. How then do we make sure that majority factions don't take over and control these minority factions? Well, according to Madison, we do so through introducing a representative government that would both dilute the spirit of these factions and introduce ideological pluralism. Having representative government means people can get represented the way they choose, and by splitting it up, you should have more opinions, more diverse opinions, more ideas going through. That's the argument he makes, and we will talk about in class and talk about going forward how well that's worked for us. But that's what Federalist number 10 argues.